Welcome to Revenge Justice, where every wrong finds its payback.
They say people reveal themselves slowly, in 1,000 ordinary moments, in the little cruelties no one notices until they add up. She grew up with a father who burned brightly, the kind of man who worked 3 jobs and still came home with a laugh, a man who built small businesses with his hands and his brains, a man who tucked his children into bed and said the sky would always be theirs. Then the disease came, stage 4. Quiet and absolute, and the family watched the light go out in a hospital room, tubes and machines keeping the shape of him, while he smiled, just once, to let his child know he still remembered her name. Grief arrives a dozen ways, and in their case it arrived with a man who called himself family. The grandfather stepped forward, polished, congratulatory, offering to help handle the 2 small businesses, to keep the legacy intact. The mother, grieving and inexperienced, accepted. She had no choice but to accept. On paper he was a helper. In practice he was a parasite. He made a show of generosity, and then he rewired the books. He diverted rent from the company's prime office to his own shell firms. He quietly bled the coffers dry while the family clung to part-time jobs and scholarships. When the children protested, he told them they were ungrateful. When the siblings teetered on the edge of giving up school, he smiled and said it was for their good. She watched the slow theft of a life her father had built. She watched her sister nearly quit medical school because the money vanished. She watched the house grow hollow as bills stacked higher than the explanations. The anger inside her was not theatrical. It was the precise, cold kind, an instrument waiting to be used. Legally, the estate belonged to the children and their mother. Emotionally, it had been stolen. She chose leverage over violence. She chose procedure over spectacle. She gathered signatures, she became the representative of her father's estate, and then she did something he never expected. At the board meeting, the chairman's chair faced the wrong way. When he strode into the room, ready to perform dominance, she turned the leather seat. There she was, composed, immovable, the one person he had assumed was small and compliant, sitting where he expected to be king. His surprise looked like humiliation. It was a small, surgical triumph. But she did not stop at theatrics. She began to unpick the web he'd woven, quietly, legally, methodically. She brought in lawyers who read contracts the way surgeons read scans. She exposed shell rentals, traced diverted funds, and reclaimed profits that had been funneled through his vanity projects. She placed her mother in a permanent, legitimate role at the company. She did not gloat. She let the system do the work he had corrupted. The man who had feasted on their debt found himself depending on applause that no longer came. The office he had rented out for a profit was reclaimed. Competitors who'd colluded with him found themselves embarrassed in family gatherings and business circles. The whispers in the corridors turned into questions in boardrooms. Friends who'd once applauded his generosity began to distance themselves. His pride, the very thing he had used as currency, became his exposure. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown. There were no cameras and no banners. There was instead the steady, bureaucratic unmasking that happens when facts are placed in front of people with the power to act. The company's books were cleaned. Dividends went where they should have gone. The small empire he had imagined for himself collapsed under its own mendacity, and the man who had made a business of being magnanimous found himself unemployed, alone, and stripped of the trappings he once flaunted. He lost more than a title. He lost his audience. His wife's tolerance evaporated when she learned how much of their private fortune had been spent on a mistress and vanity projects. He retired to a house with empty rooms and echoes. The grandchildren's calls stopped coming. The neighbors no longer waved. He had built a throne of false generosity, and then, slowly, it became a chair with no one left to sit on it. She took nothing more than what the law allowed, and more than anything, she reclaimed her father's voice. She gave her mother a livelihood. She put her siblings back on track for medicine. She repaired a legacy that had been misdirected into a single man's pride. She did it without malice in public, only a cold, exacting justice executed behind the pages of signed statements and legal filings. And yet, victory carved its own wounds. She had to learn how to live with the knowledge that justice often carries a cost. The fights with family members lingered. Relationships strained under the weight of exposure. Her grandfather's humiliation was complete, and for that she felt nothing like triumph, only a grim satisfaction and an emptiness that follows a long battle. She had been patient enough to let the world right itself, and ruthless enough to steer it when it would not. Greed corrodes quietly, until only silence remains where a family once stood. Knowledge is power, but knowledge without action is impotent. When the system is weaponized by the selfish, the remedy is not always loud. Sometimes the most effective justice is the slow reassembly of truth, the placing of facts before those who cannot ignore them, and the steady reclamation of what was stolen. If this story teaches anything, let it be this: you do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to be vindictive to be effective. You must be patient, prepared, and precise. If you believe justice should be measured, and if you want more stories where the wrongdoers finally face the consequences of their choices, the moral is clear. Like and subscribe to our channel for more true tales of justice, patience, and the quiet art of retribution.